It's late, I know, but I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're casting off into something that's been half romanticized, half forgotten pirates. Not the rum-chugging, eye-patched rebels of your childhood cartoons, but the real ones, the drifting ones, the ones who lived hard, died slowly, and left behind little more than weathered bones and terrible dental hygiene. This is a story about freedom that didn't feel free, about men who vanished into sea mist, not as legends, but as leftovers. So if you're here to fall asleep, or just feel a little less alone tonight, stay a while. This might be the kind of story that helps you do both. If you enjoy this sort of slow, haunted history, you're welcome to subscribe, but only if it feels right. No pressure, just drift. And if you're listening from a port town, a ship cabin, or maybe just your bed at 3 a.m., leave a comment. I'd love to know where you're moored tonight. Now dim the lights, and let's drift back in time. Before we knew what pirates smelled like, before the tar stiffened, socks, and the pickled skin, and the ulcers that sang at night, we imagined them differently. Parrots on shoulders, gold in chests, a kind of freedom that felt cinematic, like every morning started with a sword fight and ended with laughter echoing across a sunset deck. But like most things that get printed on posters, that wasn't the truth. The average pirate didn't have a parrot, or treasure, or anything, really, unless you count dysentery as a prize. Most of them weren't even that committed to piracy. They were deserters, drunks, debtors, or just unlucky sailors who picked the wrong harbor on the wrong day. You see, nobody dreams of becoming a pirate. They become one the way you fall into a ditch. Slowly, at first, then all at once, and the sea. It wasn't a mistress. It was a mortgage they couldn't pay, a hunger they couldn't quiet, a cold that crept into their bones and stayed there, even in dreams. Let's say it plainly, piracy was not a job. It was a resignation letter, a quiet whisper that you no longer expected to die in bed. And they didn't. They died in storms, or on ropes, or in prisons, or from infections that started with something small, a cut, a splinter, a bruise, and ended with your shipmates avoiding your corpse for fear of catching whatever had turned your gums black. And yet, there's something there, isn't there? Something that still draws us in. Maybe it's the idea of being untethered, of saying no to a world that's asked too much, of drifting out past where the rules apply. Because even if it meant dying slowly, it meant choosing something. It meant choosing yourself, even if yourself was falling apart. The truth is, pirate life was closer to a long goodbye than an adventure, more rot than rum, more waiting than winning. But we love them anyway, the way we love all tragedies that pretend to be comedies. Because deep down, maybe we don't want to be pirates. We just want to escape without having to explain why. It's easy to romanticize a ship, the creak of wood, the horizon like a promise, the idea that out there you're free. But here's the quiet truth. Most pirate ships were prisons, floating ones, with worse plumbing. Freedom on deck meant something different. It meant you could sleep in your own hammock if no one else had claimed it. It meant you could vote for your captain, but only if you weren't too seasick to stand. It meant you could chase wealth, just as long as you didn't mind being hunted by empires or eaten by the ocean. There was a kind of democracy among pirates, yes, a code even. Articles of agreement signed by trembling hands, shares of loot, rules about mutiny, about stealing, about who got what when someone lost a leg. But democracy in a world where your body is already falling apart, that's not exactly utopia. And this freedom wasn't built to last, not on salted meat and fear, because the wind doesn't care how bravely you dream, and the sea doesn't vote. It just takes. Still, the illusion persisted. Picture a young man, barely 20, standing barefoot on the deck, watching the coastline disappear. Maybe he thinks this is it, his real life. Maybe he thinks he's escaped the grinding poverty of London's alleys, or the stink of a tannery, or the cruelty of a captain who liked to use his whip too much. Maybe he's smiling, but give it time. His gums will start to bleed. His clothes will rot faster than his dreams, and the rum. It doesn't taste like celebration. It tastes like forgetting. Because the kind of freedom piracy promised wasn't freedom at all. It was neglect in a new costume. The world stopped noticing you, and so you called it liberation. Even when you were dying slowly, especially then. But people kept signing up, because what else was there? The land wasn't safe, the city wasn't kind, and somewhere deep in the human soul is a need to run not towards something better, but just away from the thing that hurt us last. So they ran, and they called it piracy, and for a while it sounded brave. Let's talk about meals. Not the kind with candlelight or courses, the kind with hardtack and maggots, the kind where you chew because you must, not because you want to. A pirate's diet was a kind of slow-motion betrayal. Salted meats soaked in brine until the texture was halfway between rubber and regret. Biscuits so hard you could chip a tooth, and if you looked closely, tiny black dots. Weevils, always the weevils. Some sailors tapped the biscuit on the table to knock the bugs out. Others just ate them. Extra protein, they'd say, because jokes help when the food doesn't. Fresh water turned foul after weeks at sea, so they drank ale when they had it, rum when they didn't. By mid-voyage, even the rats were picky. And then came the bleeding. Scurvy is not a gentle disease. First, your gums swell, then they bleed, then your teeth begin to loosen. You bruise for no reason. Old wounds reopen, bones ache, skin yellows. Your breath could make the devil wince, all for want of citrus. A single lemon could have saved you. But lemons didn't float, and even if they had, no one thought to pack them, or maybe they did, once. But then the quartermaster traded them for gunpowder, or women, or more rum. Because short-term thinking isn't a pirate trait, it's a human one. And when your body starts to break, you don't shout. You grow quiet. You curl up in your hammock and hope it's just fatigue. You pray your shipmates don't notice the way your lips have split, because once you're seen as weak, you become cargo. Something to be offloaded, one way or another. And the sea has always accepted offerings. It's a strange thing how often the worst suffering in history happened quietly. No battle, no storm. Just slow hunger and the sound of someone coughing in the dark. There were no graves at sea. Just a weighted sack, a brief prayer, and the soft splash of a body going where the sun doesn't reach. But this wasn't rare. It was normal, expected, part of the life. And still, they sang. Sea shanties, those sad, rhythmic hymns that people now remix into TikToks, were born not out of joy, but monotony. They gave rhythm to labor. They masked the silence. They kept your hands moving when your soul was too tired to care. Dead men tell no tales, they said. But the truth is, they do. You just have to listen to the echoes. In every creak of timber, every cough below deck, every song hummed at twilight by a man too young to have given up, and too tired to pretend he hadn't. There's a kind of madness that grows on ships. It doesn't announce itself with screaming or violence, at least, not at first. It begins with silence. Long, slow, aching silences. Between men who once told stories. Between friends who've stopped making eye contact. Between the captain and his crew, when orders start to sound more like threats. Because on a pirate ship, everyone is stuck. Together, always. There's no privacy, no escape. If someone sings off-key, you hear it. If someone steals your share of the meat, you know it. If someone is going mad, it's not a mystery. It's an inevitability. And then, someone suggests mutiny. Softly, at first. Half a joke. A whisper passed across hammocks. A shared glance when the captain turns his back. He's been drinking too much, they say. He hasn't divided the spoils fairly. He hasn't kept us safe. It doesn't take much. A storm, a failed raid. A man whipped for talking back. Pirates weren't known for their patience. The vote comes quickly. They always vote to keep it clean. Even mutiny had its manners. Sometimes the captain was left on a sandbar. Sometimes tied to the mast and whipped until he died. Sometimes thrown overboard, and then the crew cheers. For a moment, freedom again, but the high doesn't last. A new captain rises. Another man with a temper. Another man who drinks. Another man who promises fairness. Until the next raid fails. Until someone else goes hungry. Because mutiny never solved the problem. It just reset the clock. And what they were really rebelling against wasn't leadership. It was the conditions. The rot, the hunger, the gnawing fear that they'd made a mistake they couldn't undo. A man doesn't become a pirate because he believes in something. He becomes a pirate because he's lost belief in everything else. So they turned on each other. Over scraps. Over insult. Over a coin someone swore was theirs. The sea may be wide, but the ship is small. Resentment grows quickly in cramped quarters. Paranoia even faster. And sometimes, the worst part wasn't the mutiny. It was what came after. When the blood had dried. When the deck was quiet. When the new captain sat in the old one's chair, eyes hollow, knowing that it was only a matter of time before it happened to him too. Because on a pirate ship, every man is a captain in waiting, and a corpse in progress. By the end of Itif, there was an end. Many pirates didn't know what they were anymore. They had no nation, no home, no last name anyone could remember. Their accents blurred into salt-stained mumbling. Their bodies bent by malnutrition. Their eyes dim from sun and sickness. They had become something else. Not men, not monsters. Just ghosts who hadn't stopped breathing. They drifted to places that didn't exist on maps. Coves and inlets known only by word of mouth. Passed like secrets from ship to ship. Tortuga, Madagascar, New Providence. Island brief, pirate utopias where rules went to die. Here, for a while, they played at life. They bought rum with stolen silver. Gambled, fought, lay with women who knew exactly how temporary it all was. Laughed too loudly, slept too deeply. But nothing grows in soil this poisoned. The governors came, eventually. The navies, the flags of empires that didn't forget. They offered pardons and amnesty for those who gave up piracy. Some took them, hoping to start over. Most didn't. Pride, maybe. Or the knowledge that the world they left didn't want them back. And so, piece by piece, the pirate age dissolved. Not with a final battle, not with a cannon blast, but with quiet disappearances. Ships never heard from again. Crewmates buried in foreign sand. Flags lowered, burnt, forgotten. We don't remember their names. Not really. Not most of them. History keeps A few Blackbeard, Calico Jack, and Bonnie. The rest dissolve like foam on the waves. And perhaps that's fitting, because piracy was never meant to last. It was a flare in the dark, a desperate cry from people who knew they wouldn't be saved. But there's something almost holy about it. The way they vanished. No graves, no statues, just a breath of wind over the ocean and a story half told. And even now, we still listen. We still dress up like them, still toast with rum, still whisper about treasure and freedom and flags with skulls, as if we're afraid of forgetting them completely. Or maybe we're afraid we already have. So if you hear creaking in your house tonight or waves in your ears as you drift to sleep, don't be startled. It's just the ghosts of men who once believed they could outrun the world, and almost did. Let's take a moment to walk the deck, quietly, carefully, as if we've stepped into someone else's memory. This isn't a ship from the movies. There are no billowing sails set against a technicolor sky. The paint is chipped. The sails are patched with whatever cloth they could find. The ropes are stiff with salt and blood. Everything smells faintly of fish, rot, sweat, and something darker you can't quite name. This is not a place of glory, it's a place of survival. The ship, usually a sloop or a brigantine, wasn't chosen for beauty. It was fast, light, and small enough to escape the bigger warships that hunted them. That's what mattered. Not comfort, not elegance, just the odds of getting away. Every inch of space was used. Barrels of water, already going stale, were crammed into the hold. Gunpowder stored beside food. Hammocks swung inches apart, damp and cold and too short for real sleep. Above deck, the cannons waited. Crude, heavy, temperamental things. Firing them meant risking your own eardrums, and sometimes your fingers. And when they worked, they didn't destroy ships. They tore people open. Below deck, the air was thick. No fresh breeze, just the breath of 50 or more men, sweating, coughing, groaning through another endless day at sea. It was dark, wet, hot, the kind of heat that sticks to your ribs, the kind that makes your skin feel wrong. And yet, this was home. They carved names into the wood, tied bits of cloth to the mast, made charms out of bones, nails, teeth, little talismans against death. A piece of order in the chaos. Even in ruin, people try to make meaning. The captain's quarters were only slightly better. A narrow desk, charts half stolen, half invented. A cot, maybe. A bottle, definitely. And always, the weight of knowing every man aboard was watching him, waiting to see if he'd falter. A pirate ship was a body, living, dying, hungry. It bled when struck, moaned in storms, held grudges, gave up secrets slowly, and like any body, it could turn on itself. Wood warped, sails tore, nails rusted, rats gnawed through ropes. And when the ship gave out, it didn't sink like in the stories. It listed, drifted, sagged into the water like a tired beast. And the crew, they'd watch, helpless, knowing that this rotting vessel, this stinking, creaking, splintered raft, was the only thing between them and a death too wide to measure. But still, they patched it, nailed it back together, kept it alive one day longer, because it was all they had. Because even a broken ship is better than drowning. You'd think pirates loved to fight. The legends make it sound that way. Cannons roaring, swords clashing, sea spray lit by firelight. As if every raid was a scene from a painting, brave men leaping from ship to ship with daggers between their teeth. But ask any sailor who lived through one, and they'll tell you, fighting was failure. Battles were desperate, ugly things. They stank, they screamed, They shattered you in ways that no amount of rum could erase. A good pirate captain avoided them. He relied on fear, not force, because fear was cheaper. Blood was expensive. The black flag, the Jolly Roger, was never meant to invite violence. It was a threat, a promise that if you resisted, you would die badly, slowly, without mercy. Most merchant ships, when they saw that flag, surrendered without a shot, because they knew pirates weren't bound by treaties. They didn't take prisoners unless they needed leverage. They were hungry, desperate, unpredictable. They'd take the cargo, sometimes the crew, sometimes fingers, ears, or worse, just to make the next ship surrender faster. But when a fight did come, it was fast, brutal, and never like the stories. Cannons fired once, maybe twice, before the ships collided. Then it was close combat, hatchets, pistols, broken glass, not heroic duels, just chaos. Blood on the deck, screams in the rigging, someone falling overboard, clutching their stomach, already forgotten. And when it was over, if you lived, you were expected to laugh, to drink, to celebrate. But how do you celebrate when you've just watched a man bleed out with his eyes open? When your shoulder's dislocated, your leg won't bend, and the ship you just stole smells like someone else's fear. Sometimes they'd find treasure, coins, spices, silk, and for a few nights the crew would feel invincible. They'd sing louder, drink deeper, pretend they weren't hollowed out inside, but the high never lasted. The treasure ran out. The wounds didn't heal right. The ghosts didn't leave. And beneath the revelry, a question lingered. If this is winning, what does losing look like? There's a kind of emptiness that follows joy on a pirate ship. A strange, echoing quiet that descends after the singing stops. The night after a victory should feel triumphant. The hold full of spoils, bellies full, bruises beginning to fade. But instead, there's often just silence. Because what's left to say? That you survived. So what? Everyone who's still breathing already knows that you won, maybe. But who lost? A merchant ship full of boys no older than your brother. A captain who begged for mercy. A cook with a knife in his neck, still holding the ladle. The rum doesn't taste like reward. It tastes like denial. And in that silence, men remember. They remember what they were before they were pirates. A carpenter's apprentice, a farmer's son, a man who signed on to a navy ship thinking it'd be a career, not a sentence. They remember sweethearts, mothers, letters that never arrived, and they wonder, what would it be like to go back? But going back isn't possible, not just because the law is hunting you, though it is, but because something inside you has changed, hardened, broken. You've done things now, things you don't talk about, even to yourself. And so they sit in the dark, watching the sea roll by, listening to the creak of the ship, counting coins they'll spend in a port that doesn't care. And that's when the real loneliness hits. Because pirate ships are full of men, but not full of friends. Brotherhood is conditional here, based on usefulness, strength, fear. The moment you're too weak to carry your weight, to swing a blade, to climb the rigging, your ballast, and no one sings for ballast. So you drink, you laugh when others do, you pretend, because pretending is easier than confronting what you've become. Even the sky seems to know. The stars don't twinkle out, here they stare, cold, indifferent, old, like they've seen this story too many times before. And below them, a ship creaks on black water, full of gold, full of ghosts, full of men pretending they aren't both. It's strange, isn't it? How gold can feel heavy in the hand but hollow in the heart. That was the thing about treasure. It looked better in legends, better in the minds of the men who risked everything for it. The coins, the jewels, the bolts of silkshore, they shimmered. But they didn't cure scurvy. They didn't fix broken teeth or broken backs or the quiet fracture in a man's soul. Gold was supposed to mean something. Wealth, power, safety. But on a pirate ship, it mostly meant suspicion. Who took more than their share? Who's hiding something? Who will slit your throat while you sleep? After a good haul, the ship grew tense. Eyes narrowed, hands hovered near blades. Men who once joked and sang started sitting alone, watching, waiting. The articles of agreement, the pirate code said, shares would be equal, more or less, a full share for each man, a half share for the cook, extra for the captain and quartermaster, payouts for injuries, so many coins for a lost arm, more for a leg. It was math, cold, simple math. But greed doesn't do math well. It mutates it, warps it. And once the loot was divided, there came the real problem. What now? Some wanted to spend it all at once, drunk in a tavern, surrounded by warmth and the illusion of company. Others wanted to hoard it, bury it, vanish inland where no one knew their name. A few believed naively, perhaps, that they could buy back the lives they'd lost. But money doesn't wash away blood, not the kind that soaks into the wood of your ship or into your dreams. And the ports where they spent it, those weren't safe either. Tortuga, Port Royal, Nassau. They welcomed pirates until they didn't. Until the governors changed, or the British Navy showed up, or some half-starved traitor ratted everyone out for a pardon and a purse. Even the brothels had spies. Even the bartenders had knives. A pirate with too much gold was a target. A pirate with too little was a liability. And so they lived in cycles. Steal, spend, return, bleed steel again. Always chasing something they couldn't name. Some last great haul. Some mythical retirement on a quiet island with mango trees and no ghosts. But no one ever found it, because gold changes hands, always. That's its curse. It doesn't stay, it can't. So the chest gets filled and emptied and filled again, passed from one desperate hand to another, until it ends up in a museum, behind glass, catalogued and admired by people who've never watched a man kill for it. People who call it history, but for the ones who carried it, it was just the weight that pulled them under. And maybe that's why pirates buried their treasure, not to hide it, but because they couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Sometimes, in the darkest corners of a ship's hold beneath the damp ropes and forgotten barrels, you'd find them. Little scraps of paper, folded, hidden, tucked away like contraband. Letters, not delivered, of course. There was no pirate post office. No sloop of sentiment gliding between blood-stained ports. But they wrote them anyway, because even cutthroats have people they miss, or people they regret, or people they wish they could have been in another life. You'd find them years later, brittle with salt, ink smudged by sea air, addressed to sweethearts, mothers, children who wouldn't even remember the man who penned the words. Tell Thomas I'm sorry for leaving. I dream of your bread and your laugh. If I live, I'll find you. So much hope, bleeding through the page like a wound that hadn't healed. And that's what they were, these letters, wounds, not attempts at reunion. Just proof that they'd once been human. Because after enough time on the sea, you forget. Not all at once, but slowly. You forget your last name, your village, the smell of dry earth, the way it feels to be clean. You forget how to speak softly, how to trust, how to want anything more than food, sleep, and a bit of quiet. The letters were like time capsules from a man who no longer existed, and maybe they were never meant to be sent. Maybe writing them was enough, like carving your name into a tree before drowning, like whispering a prayer no God will hear. Some pirates died clutching those letters. Others used them to light pipes or wrap wounds, and a few, a strange, aching few, held on to them, carried them from port to port, through storm and sickness, folded and refolded until the creases tore and the paper fell apart, not because they thought they'd ever go home, but because it felt like the only part of them that hadn't rotted. Even the hardest men, the ones with notches in their belts and scars like maps, had someone they remembered when the sea was too quiet. And maybe, in the end, those letters weren't for the ones they addressed. Maybe they were messages in bottles, cast into a future they'd never see. Maybe they were meant for us, to remind us that even the monsters of history had mothers who cried, lovers who waited, children who wondered, and dreams that didn't survive the salt. The sea is not a setting. It's not a backdrop for adventure, or romance, or cinematic death. It's a character, a god, in a way. One that doesn't care if you believe in it or not. Ask any pirate who spent more than a week at sea, and they'd tell you quietly, if they were sober, that the ocean isn't blue. Not really, it's grey, black on bad days, sometimes green, always shifting, always watching, and it does not love you back. It takes warmth, it takes direction, it takes names and memories and sails and entire ships, and it gives back silence. Even the stars can't save you, not when the clouds roll in and the compass spins like it's drunk. Even the bravest men grow small on the open water, and it doesn't take long. 3 days without seeing land, and already your thoughts feel like whispers in a cathedral too big to be kind. There's a myth that pirates danced with the sea, that they tamed her, that they knew her moods, her rhythms, but the truth is simpler. They didn't tame her, they negotiated with her. Every day at sea was a deal. We'll give you sweat, you give us wind. We'll give you blood, you let us float. We'll give you one of our own, just let the rest of us live another night. Sometimes the sea said yes, more often she didn't. Storms didn't always look like storms. Sometimes they began with a luller, sudden stillness that made men glance nervously at the sky. Then the wind would rise, almost playful at first, a ripple across the water, a creak in the mast, a sound like something holding its breath. Then it came, rain that slapped your skin like fists, waves taller than memory, lightning so close it burned the air, and the ship, this fragile, floating coffin, would groan like it knew its time had come. Men tied themselves to the mast, prayed, screamed. Some just went quiet, letting the storm speak for all of them. And when it passed, if it passed, you didn't celebrate. You just stared at the empty hammocks, counted the sails, took inventory of what the sea had decided to keep. It was never a fair trade, and yet they returned, again and again, because some men are born to chase the thing that will destroy them, not because they think they'll win, but because it's the only thing that makes them feel alive. Every pirate had a compass, or wanted one, a little brass circle with a needle that twitched like a dying insect, promising direction. But here's the secret. Most compasses don't point north. Not really, not true north. They point to magnetic fields, to illusions. They point somewhere, yes, but not always where you think you're going. And that's the problem. Not just with compasses, with everything. Pirates didn't get lost because they were bad navigators. They got lost because the world shifted under them, because the maps were wrong, or too old, or drawn by men who had never touched salt water, because the stars were obscured, because sometimes, in the middle of the sea, you couldn't remember what direction felt like. You'd think there's comfort in knowing where you are, in lines and charts and celestial maps, but sometimes the truth of it is worse, knowing exactly where you are, and still realizing you have nowhere to go. Some ships went in circles for days. Others followed the sun, like pilgrims chasing a god that never answered. Others drifted, truly drifted. No sails, no course, just wind and current and the sound of the hull sighing like it wanted to be done. And in those moments, the compass was no comfort. It was a reminder, a small, twitching truth. You are utterly alone out here. The world is wide, and you are not wanted in it. There were stories, always stories of ships that sailed off the edge of the map, found islands no one else had seen, met gods or monsters or salvation. Every port had a sailor with a tale like that. But you learn quickly, most men who talk like that haven't been to sea, or if they have, they're trying not to remember what they lost out there, because the sea doesn't reveal new lands. It reveals yourself. And most pirates didn't like what they found. Men who swore they were brave wept in the dark. Men who'd slit a throat for coin begged the moon for mercy. Men who dreamed of treasure started dreaming of dry land, a bed, a meal that didn't move. The compass needle never stops, but men do. And when you realize it's been pointing not north, but inward, it's hard to keep pretending you're the hero of your own story. More often, you're just a man with a rusted blade, a bad tooth, and a direction you can't trust. Still, you follow it, because what else is there? There's a moment somewhere around the third week at sea when everything begins to shift. The water isn't the thing that changes. You are. First, the sounds start to feel too loud, or too quiet. The flap of a sail becomes thunder. A cough in the dark sounds like a scream. You start to hear things that aren't their bells, voices, music. Sometimes your own name whispered just behind your shoulder. Then it's the time. You lose track of it. The sun rises and sets, but you stop counting. The days blur. You ask someone what day it is, and they don't know either. Or worse, they answer with confidence. Say 3 different men say 3 different things. That's when you realize the calendar was always a land-born luxury. Then you stop trusting the horizon. It moves, it shrinks, it seems too close, or impossibly far. Some men swear they see land when there's none. Others become convinced the sea is folding in on them, like they're sailing in circles through a living thing that's learning to breathe. Men get quiet then, not out of peace, but preservation. Because if you speak the wrong thing aloud, if you say, "I think I saw a face in the waves," or "I heard my mother singing from the crow's nest," someone might believe you. And then you're not a crewmate. You're a liability. They'll watch you. They'll whisper. And one morning, you won't wake up in your hammock. You'll be gone, fallen overboard, they'll say. A tragic slip in the night. But you'll know, because you saw it happen to someone else last week. This is the part of pirate life no one writes down. The edge of madness. The slow fraying of the self. The fact that isolation isn't always physical. Sometimes it's internal. A quiet, drifting away from who you used to be. They didn't call it mental illness. They didn't have words for trauma or psychosis. They just called you cursed, or touched, or unlucky. And in some ways, they were right, because the sea demands everything from you. And if you're lucky, she only takes your gold, your teeth, your youth. If you're not, she takes your mind, one wave at a time. When the storm comes, and it always doesn't ask for permission. There's no warning, not really, just a change in the air, a pressure in your bones, a kind of stillness so deep it hums, as if the ocean is drawing breath before it decides what to do with you. The clouds roll in like bruises, the sky forgets how to be blue, and then everything you once believed about control, strength, and planning falls apart. Because you don't fight a storm, you survive it if you can. The sails become weapons, the ropes, snakes, the deck a slick, bucking beast that wants you off. Men tie themselves to the mast because the sea will take you fast. One moment you're there, clutching a barrel or shouting over the wind, and then you're gone. No splash, no cry, just absence. And yet, in those moments when the sky is screaming and the ship groans like a dying animal, some men pray. Not loud, not with ceremony, just quiet words, muttered into the rain. Half-remembered psalms, scraps of lullabies, bargains with gods they haven't spoken to in years. If I live, I'll change. If I live, I'll go home. If I live, but the storm doesn't care. It's not listening, or if it is, it doesn't answer with words. It answers with lightning, with broken masts, with splinters that bury themselves in your flesh, and infections that follow close behind. You might survive the night. Many didn't. The storm keeps its own books, and afterward, silence again. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow, shell-shocked kind. The ship limps forward, half its sails torn, its men limping in body and mind. No one speaks of the ones who didn't make it. Their hammocks stay rolled, their shares quietly divided. Life goes on, but smaller, like it's been scooped out. And here's the strange part. Some pirates believed the storm was a kind of cleansing, a test, a sermon from the sea herself. That those who lived were chosen in some grim, salt-streaked way. Not better, just spared. They'd drink to that, not out of celebration, but out of ritual, a toast to survival, a toast to silence, a toast to the fact that, for now, the sea had let them keep breathing, and that was enough. For now, every port town has them, old women who stare too long at the horizon, tavern keepers who keep a mug clean for someone whose name they stopped saying, children with a sailor's eyes who never met the man who gave them to their mothers. They are the evidence, the quiet, breathing remnants of all the pirates who never came home. Because most didn't. Some died in battle, or from wounds that festered until they stank. Others went overboard in the dark. A few simply vanished. A ship sets out, sails into the blue, and never returns. No wreckage, no message, just silence that stretches for decades. Eventually, someone stops asking. The world is not full of pirate graves. There are no neat rows, no carved stones. Their cemeteries are the seabed, their markers coral and barnacle, and most of them died without witnesses, or worse, with witnesses who looked away. It's easy to become a ghost when no one is left to remember who you were. But sometimes, just sometimes, a man did return, not as a hero, not with treasure, just with his life, and the scars to prove he'd once gambled it. He'd walk into a town he barely recognized, where the streets had changed, the children had grown, and the girl he loved had married someone steadier, someone whole. He wouldn't stay. He couldn't. The land didn't make sense anymore. The stillness hurt his ears. The smell of dry earth, of clean linens, and quiet evenings, it was too foreign, too soft. So he'd drift, town to town, doing odd jobs, drinking in silence, sleeping in barns, sometimes saying he was a sailor, rarely saying more. Because how do you explain where you've been, when where you've been doesn't exist anymore? The golden age of piracy wasn't just about ships. It was about a feeling, a hunger, a wound, a rebellion that lived in men who didn't know how to name it. And once that age ended, they didn't fade into history. They just faded into alleys, into silence, into sea stories that no one believed anymore. And if you listen, really listen, when the wind rattles an old shutter or a wave crashes against a forgotten dock, you might hear them, not calling for help, just reminding you they were here, once, before the sea took the rest. There was always a port, a place they dreamed about on long nights at sea, a name passed around like a secret, whispered with rum on the breath. Wait till we get to Nassau. Just make it to Tortuga. They weren't just harbors, they were hopes in human form. Places where you could spend your share, sleep without rocking, touch something warm that didn't come with a price in blood. But the truth, most pirate ports weren't paradise. They were just land that tolerated you. Tortuga, Port Royal, Nassau weren't the Caribbean dreamscapes of glossy brochures. They were swamps with brothels, markets with knives behind every smile, docks made of splinters and grudges. And yet, pirates came, because compared to the open sea, they offered something dangerously close to comfort, just enough to make you forget the cost. You'd walk down the gangplank, legs trembling from weeks of motion, and smell the rot of fruit and sweat and something worse. Hear the chaos. Laughter that didn't sound kind. Music that was out of tune and too fast. People shouting in 5 languages, none of them yours. It felt alive, until it didn't. The taverns were full of people trying to drown things, memories, guilt, boredom. They drank like they were trying to hollow themselves out. They fought over nothing. They laughed too loud, because silence was dangerous. And the brothels, they weren't love, they were business. Women with tired eyes. Men who sold their bodies for coin or safety or a moment of illusion. Everyone pretending not to see how broken everyone else was. You could spend your entire haul in a single night. Many did. Gold was heavy. Rum was light. The equation solved itself. And when the money ran out, you were back on the street. Back on a ship. Back chasing the next raid, the next thrill, the next empty promise of something better. There were governors, sometimes, British appointed, Spanish backed, or simply corrupt. They made deals with pirates, took bribes, turned a blind eye on till they didn't. One day you were welcome, the next, hunted, executed in the square, body left for the flies. A lesson to others. The island didn't care. It swallowed you, spit you out. There were no second chances, just second rounds. And still, men kept coming. Because even the illusion of safety is better than none at all. Because when you've lived too long at sea, land of filthy, dangerous land feels like a mercy. They called it paradise. But for most it was just where the nightmare paused, not where it ended. Not every pirate was a man, and not every legend wore a beard or drank rum until he forgot his name. Some wore dresses when they had to, others wore knives hidden in their corsets, and a few didn't bother with the disguise at all. Anne Bonny, Mary Read, Ching Shi. Names that don't get enough space in history books, but echo across the docks in whispers. Because these women didn't just survive in a world built to forget them, they rewrote its rules. Take Anne Bonny, born out of wedlock, raised in scandal, married a sailor, ran off with a pirate. She dressed like a man, fought like a devil, and once told a condemned crewmate, "If you had fought like a man, you wouldn't be hanged like a dog." She didn't say that for effect. She said it because, by then, she'd seen the inside of too many ships, felt the cold steel of too many betrayals. She'd laughed with killers and wept with strangers and stared down the kind of storms that turned strong men into children. Or Mary Read, disguised as a boy from youth, served in the army, fell in love with a fellow soldier. After his death, she returned to the sea, joined a pirate crew, and carved her own place among the damned. She fought beside Anne, side by side, blade by blade, until they were captured betrayed by the very man who once called them his equals. When they were sentenced to hang, they pleaded the belly. Pregnant women, under English law, couldn't be executed. A delay, not a pardon. But a delay can mean everything when the rope is already being tied. And then there was Ching Shi, not a Caribbean raider, a South China Sea Empress. A former prostitute who married into piracy, then took over an entire fleet after her husband died. She commanded tens of thousands, issued her own laws, defied the Qing dynasty, the Portuguese, the British all of them. And when she finally walked away, it wasn't in chains. It was in wealth, in power, in legend. She retired, peacefully. Most pirates don't get that kind of ending. But then again, most pirates weren't her. These women weren't anomalies. They were proof that the sea didn't care what you were born as, only how you bled, how you fought, how loud you screamed into the wind when the world tried to silence you. The island was cruel, yes, but not more cruel than the world they left behind. And for a brief moment out there, among the waves, blades drawn and hearts on fire, they weren't outlaws, they were queens. Every pirate knew the name of a port they hoped never to see. It changed, depending on the year, the empire, the politics. But the meaning stayed the same. A place where the gallows were tall, and mercy had a short leash. In England, it might have been Execution Dock in Wapping. In the colonies, maybe Boston or Port Royal. Wherever it was, it smelled like rope and rot and freshly swept stone, and it always had a crowd. Executions were entertainment then. They happened in daylight. People brought bread, children, drinks. Some wore their Sunday clothes. They jostled for a view, laughed too loudly. It wasn't about justice. It was a spectacle. A warning wrapped in cruelty and pirates. Pirates were the headliners. The condemned were marched through the streets, chains clinking like punctuation, sometimes in rags, sometimes in defiance. They'd shout jokes, curse the crown, ask for one last drink, one last song, one last moment to remember that once they were more than this. The noose was thick, the drop was short. If the hangman was kind, he'd pull your legs to speed it up. If he wasn't, you'd dance. Dancing the hempen jig, they called it. Funny how language makes death easier to watch. Some pirates were gibbeted after their corpses hung in iron cages, swaying above the shore, left there to rot, to bleach in the sun, to warn other sailors. This is what happens when you step off the path. But pirates rarely saw it as punishment. For many, it was the only ending that made sense. They lived fast. They died loud. Better the noose than a slow rot in prison. Better the gallows than dying on some nameless rock, ribs poking through your skin, forgotten by everyone except the crabs. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone survived. Not because they escaped, but because the wind changed. The governor's mood shifted, or a royal pardon came through, stamped and sealed, and handed to a man who had already made peace with dying. Imagine that, your head on the block, the hooded man ready, and then a paper, a signature, a second chance. What do you do with that? Some left piracy, opened taverns, wrote memoirs, half true. Others returned to the sea, unable to bear the quiet. A few disappeared entirely, names erased, legends born. But most, they didn't make it that far. Most swung, and the crowd clapped, and the sun shone. And somewhere, a child asked why the man kicked like that, and no one answered. Because if you answer, you admit it's real. You admit that this was a man, not just a pirate. A man. There was always one. A tavern, half built, half broken, somehow always open. You could smell it before you saw Itram, sweat, fish, and the sharp tang of something burning that no one cared enough to extinguish. It didn't have a name, or if it did, it changed too often to matter. They called it the hold, or the broken compass, or simply the place. It was never elegant. The floor was sticky. The walls leaned like tired men. The chairs were mismatched, and the light was just dim enough to forgive most faces. But it was sacred, in a way, not for worship, but for forgetting. A pirate walked into a tavern like a man stepping into church. The same hush, the same rituals, the same desperate hope for redemption, or at least a brief reprieve from damnation. Coins hit the counter like confessions. No words needed, just the sound of surrender. One drink for the pain in your back, another for the boy you left behind, a third for the man you've become. And then you talk, not of truth, never that. Truth was too sharp. But stories, boasts, lies so old they'd fossilized into legend. I killed 5 men with 1 shot. I outran the navy in a storm. I kissed a princess and lived. Everyone knew they were lies. That was the point. Lies were warmer, easier. They softened the edges of memory and turned horror into something worth laughing at. Sometimes someone would play a fiddle, badly. No one minded. Music, like rum, didn't have to be good. It just had to be there. You might see old rivals shake hands. You might see old friends draw knives. You might see a man weep into his cup without shame. And behind the bar stood someone older than time. A woman with arms like tree limbs and a gaze that stripped you bare. Or a man with one eye and no patience, who'd seen too many pirates turn to ghosts between dusk and dawn. They knew the game, knew that most of their customers wouldn't return, knew that every spilled drink was a story that ended at sea. And still they poured, because this was the last harbor, the final anchorage before oblivion, the one place where pirates didn't have to pretend to be brave, where they could sit for an hour or two and pretend they were still whole, where even the worst of them was just another shadow at the edge of the firelight. Not a villain, not a legend, just a man. There's a moment just before dawn when the tavern falls quiet. Not because the stories are over, not because the bottles are empty, but because something in the air changes, like the island itself is holding its breath. The oil lamps flicker, the music fades, the bravest liars go silent, and in that hush, something ancient stirs. This is the hour when pirates feel the weight of their choices. No more noise to hide behind, no more laughter to borrow, just the sound of your own heart beating inside a chest that's been broken too many times. Some sit with their heads down, not sleeping, just remembering. The wife they left, the brother they failed, the home they can't return to or barely remember, the part of themselves that vanished the first time they killed a man and didn't flinch. Others stand and leave, not in groups, never loudly, just one by one. A nod to the barkeep, a final sip, a coin left on the table like a prayer no one will answer. They return to their ships like men heading to war, or worse, like men returning to a sentence they wrote for themselves. And the island, it watches them go. It knows most won't come back. Some will die in battle. Others will drown in the storm that's already building beyond the reef. A few will live long enough to regret it. Fewer still will find a way to disappear. But none will forget this place, this port of ghosts, this crumbling paradise. And the ones who stay, they're no safer. The tavern will open again that night, and new faces will walk in, or old ones wearing more scars. The barkeep will pour. The lies will return. The music will stumble its way back into existence. Because as long as there's a sea, there will be pirates. And as long as there are pirates, there will be a place to remember what they once were. The sun rises slow, salt fills the air, and the island, tired and eternal, opens its arms again, not to welcome, but to wait. Trust was rare on a pirate ship, rarer than fresh fruit, rarer than mercy. It wasn't that every pirate was a liar, though most wits that lying kept you alive longer. And trust was a weakness, a crack in the hull, a place where the water could get in. So men slept with knives, not because they expected to be attacked, but because they expected to be tempted. A fight over a ration, a glance that lingered too long on another man's share, a whispered insult turned into a death sentence at midnight for hammocks down. They didn't sleep deeply, you couldn't, not with 100 men above and below you who'd slit a throat for half a coin, not with your own conscience sharpening its teeth in the dark. Even friendship was a kind of currency, borrowed, spent, broken. You shared a drink, a story, a secret, but only enough to make it through the voyage. Anything deeper, and it became a liability, because everyone had a limit. The heat, the hunger, the boredom, it all carved into the mind, turned even the calmest man into something else, something dangerous. And when it broke, it usually broke quietly, not a scream, not a duel, just a knife, a gurgle, and a silence that the sea swallowed without comment. Sometimes the crew voted to handle it. Pirate justice, they called it. A vote, a verdict, a body overboard. Other times, they let it slide. Too tired, too guilty, or maybe they agreed with the killer. But most of the time, nothing happened, because every man knew it could be him next time. Him with the fever, him with the short rations, him with the voice that cracked in the wrong place at the wrong time. So they kept their knives close, slept with one eye open, laughed a little too loudly when someone made a joke about poison, and they waited. Because mutiny didn't always come with shouting or banners or a bloody coup. Sometimes mutiny was just a slow rot. The quiet decision, made alone, to stop caring whether the man next to you lived or died. And in that silence, in that choice, the ship became something else. Not a crew, not a brotherhood, just a coffin waiting to be nailed shut. On most ships, power came from rank, from royal blood, or inherited command, or a name signed by a king. But on a pirate ship, power was voted, chosen, and always at risk of being unchosen. Enter the quartermaster. He wasn't the captain's servant. He wasn't a second in command, either not exactly. He was balance. He was watchdog. He was the man you went to when the captain grew too cruel, too drunk, too ambitious, and more often than not, he smiled too much. Because the quartermaster knew things. He knew who stole rum, who lied about their wounds, who slept too much, and who didn't sleep at all. He watched, always. And when you looked into his eyes, you never quite knew whether he wanted to be your friend or your replacement. He was responsible for dividing loot, for discipline, for punishing theft or cowardice. His word could save you or bury you, and he didn't need to shout. The captain roared. The quartermaster whispered. That was enough. He'd settle disputes with a tilt of his head, decide a man's fate with a nod, and the crew trusted him, until they didn't, because sooner or later, the quartermaster made someone angry. Maybe he gave too much gold to one man. Maybe he turned a blind eye to a fight. Maybe he let the captain swing too many whips without stepping in. Or maybe, just maybe, he smiled at the wrong time. And when that happened, the crew remembered something important. He's not the sea. He's not a god. He's just another man. And like any man aboard, he could be voted out, or stabbed, or pushed gently over the rail into a sea that didn't keep records. There's something bleakly elegant about the way pirate power worked. It was democratic, yes, but democracy, in the belly of a storm-tossed ship full of wounded pride and spoiled meat, is a volatile thing. It breathes resentment. It feeds on suspicion. And the quartermaster, smiling, clever, calculating, always knew this. So he played his part carefully. Not too fair, not too cruel. Just enough to survive. Because he wasn't trying to rule the ship. He was trying not to die on it. Every pirate ship had a captain, but not in the way navies did. A pirate captain was chosen, not crowned. Respected sometimes, feared usually. Obeyed only if the crew still believed he should be. And that belief, it could vanish fast. All it took was one bad raid. One storm survived, but barely. One decision that felt selfish, or stupid, or slow. Captains didn't wear crowns. They wore targets. There's a moment slow, but certain, when a captain realizes the room has changed. The laughter stops when he enters. Eyes shift. Whispers continue just a beat too long. Orders are followed, but with a delay, a pause, a question behind every nod. He's still the captain, technically, but the ship has already begun to leave him behind. Sometimes he tries to claw it back, promises extra shares, loosens the rules, laughs louder, harder, hoping to remind the crew that he's one of them. But the crew doesn't want one of them anymore. They want someone else. And they're watching, waiting. He starts to speak less, sleeps with one hand on his pistol, starts drinking more than he should not for pleasure, but because silence has grown teeth. Every creak in the ship feels personal. Every laugh not shared with him feels like a vote. He remembers when they chose him, remembers the cheers, the clapping on the back, the raised mugs, and now they look through him. He could try to run, take the ship and flee under cover of night. But pirates don't forget mutiny. They don't forgive theft, and they're faster than him. They always are. Or he could go down fighting. Make them kill him loud, leave them with a memory that stings. But most don't. Most go quietly. One morning, he's gone, stepped aside, vanished during the night. Maybe overboard, maybe into exile on some nameless beach, maybe hiding in plain sight in the cargo hold, praying they forget him. A new captain takes his place. The crew cheers again. And for a moment, it feels like the ship has found its balance. But the sea knows better. The sea has seen this play before. It always ends the same. The new captain becomes the old one, and the cycle begins again. Because on a pirate ship, leadership isn't a position, it's a countdown. Mutiny didn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it was loud, a shout in the dark, A musket fired too early. Blood splashed across the deck and a new name on the lips of frightened men. But more often it was quieter, slower, more inevitable. It began with a meeting, not official, not scheduled, just a few whispers behind the mast. A drink shared with a glance, a nod, a knife passed from one hand to another. And then a vote. They called it fair. They called it just. But no one believed that. Not really. You didn't vote on a ship unless the answer was already known. You didn't raise your hand unless you knew it would be safe, or safer than the alternative. The old captain would be summoned, or surprised, or found already waiting, eyes tired, shoulders heavy, as if he'd cast the vote against himself long before the crew did. Sometimes he fought. One last lunge, one last desperate attempt to remind the men what he'd done for them. The battles survived. The storms weathered. The blood spilled to keep them afloat. But memory fades quickly at sea. Sometimes they let him live, dropped him off at the nearest shore with a pistol and a canteen. Sometimes they offered him a hammock and a half-sheriff. He agreed to shut his mouth and keep his hands to himself. Most of the time, though, they didn't, because fear is a powerful thing, and a former captain is a dangerous one. The vote was final. Democracy with a blade behind its back. Justice doled out by men who'd forgotten what mercy sounded like. And when it was done, when the deck had been washed and the name scratched off the list, they would toast. Not because they were happy, but because it was the only thing they knew how to do. Drink, cheer, pretend the blood on their boots wasn't familiar. Pretend this wasn't the fifth captain they'd buried in as many years. Mutiny didn't mean chaos. It meant control. A brutal, fragile kind of balance. The only kind the sea allowed. There's always one. A man who doesn't leave when he should. Who stays on board when the others disembark. Who watches captains rise and fall. Who survives storms and stabbings and scurvy. Not because he's lucky, but because he's too tired to die. He's not the oldest, though he looks it. His face is the color of driftwood. His fingers are crooked from too many breaks. His voice is a rasp, low and slow, like it's afraid to be heard. And no one remembers when he joined. Some say he was on the ship before the last captain, or the one before that. Some think he's cursed. Others just think he forgot how to live on land. He doesn't speak unless spoken to, doesn't fight unless cornered, doesn't drink much, but when he does, he stares into the cup like it owes him something. New recruits ask about him. Who is that? The older pirates just shrugged. He's always been here. He doesn't tell stories, but he listens. Every lie, every boast, every confession whispered between shots of rum. He absorbs it like the ship absorbs the sea, without judgment, without answer. And when mutiny brews, he doesn't lead it, but he watches. He always watches. When it's over, he helps mop the blood. Quiet, efficient, detached, like he's done it before, like it's just another part of the job. Some say he used to be a captain. Others say he killed one. A few claim he's waiting for what? No one knows. Maybe to die. Maybe for a ship that never comes. But when the crew's afraidly afraid, they look to him. Not for comfort, for confirmation. Because if he's afraid, they know it's real. He's the barometer, the ghost, the anchor they didn't ask for, but always rely on. Not for courage, but for context. He's the reminder that this life doesn't end with glory. It ends with repetition, with numbness, with a man who has seen too much to care and too little to hope. And when the next mutiny comes, and it will, he won't flinch. He'll stand in the same spot, wipe the same blade, pour the same drink, And somewhere deep inside, he'll wonder, was there a moment I could have left? A moment I could have said no? A moment, long ago, when I was still a man, not a myth? But he won't say it out loud. Because, on a pirate ship, even ghosts keep their secrets. There's always a map. Cracked parchment, burned edges, ink faded to brown. X marks the spot bold, certain, seductive. Maybe it's rolled and sealed with wax, or folded and tucked into a rusted chest, or sewn into the lining of someone's coat. Every pirate has seen one. Every pirate has wanted one, because maps mean hope. Maps mean meaning. Maps mean there is something at the end of all this. Treasure, they say, gold, jewels. Enough to retire on, enough to start over. Enough to buy a new name, a house far from the coast, maybe even silence. But here's the quiet truth. Most of those maps lead nowhere. They were fakes, diversions, stories made physical, meant to trick, to distract, to keep a crew loyal just one voyage longer. Some were copied from other maps, line for line, until the original was forgotten. Others were drawn in desperation by dying men who needed their killers to believe there was something worth waiting for. Even the real ones were flawed. Islands shift, rivers dry up, land crumbles into the sea, and memory is worse than useless when you're lost. Still, they searched, because it wasn't about the gold. Not really. It was about the idea that something good might still be out there. That after all the storms, all the blood, all the betrayals, there could still be a reward, a reason, a meaning. The map became a ritual, laid out in candlelight, studied with furrowed brows, argued over, guarded like a lover, as if reading it long enough would unlock more than geography would, unlock fate itself. Some captains died chasing those maps, starved on forgotten shores, killed by their own men when the X turned out to be a patch of sand and a crab. A few went mad, talking to their maps, dreaming aloud of empires and freedom and white sails never seen again. And when a map did lead to treasure it, almost never ended well, because gold changes men faster than hunger, and suddenly the ship is a powder keg. Old friends become enemies, the crew splits, the guns come out, and the treasure, the glorious shining reward, becomes a curse, or worse, a burden. So most pirates died without treasure, but they died believing in it, because to stop believing in treasure was to admit that all of this was for nothing. There are stories, dark, half-whispered ones, about the kind of treasure no one wants to find twice. Not gold, not silver, not glittering coins or silk-lined glory. Teeth, human teeth, in a box, found deep in the hold of a wrecked galleon, or buried beneath a tree that shouldn't have grown there, or wrapped in oilcloth beside a skeleton that had no name. Sometimes the teeth are polished, sorted, marked with strange symbols. Other times they're mixed in with coins and rings, as if someone couldn't tell the difference anymore between currency and memory. And once, they say just once, a pirate cracked open a chest expecting emeralds and found nothing but molars. Hundreds of them, some still bloody. What kind of man keeps those? A torturer, a collector, a captain too long at sea. Maybe it's a metaphor, a warning, that every treasure comes at a cost, that every chest of gold is filled, one way or another, by the things taken from others, their time, their peace, their teeth. Because pirates didn't just steal from the rich, they stole from anyone slower, weaker, smaller, fishermen, traders, entire villages. They took what they wanted, and they left behind silence and fire. And sometimes the teeth were the only things left behind. You might say, well, it's just a story. And it is. But every story grows from something true. Some seed of horror. Some splinter of guilt, too sharp to touch directly. So we tell it slant. We talk about cursed chests, buried secrets, ghosts. But what we're really talking about is this. What if the treasure you find reflects the man you've become? What if you sail across the world, chasing wealth, and when you finally open the box, it looks back at you? No sparkle, no triumph, just the weight of what you've done, staring from a pile of shattered smiles. And in that moment, what do? Laugh, weep, close the lid and bury it again. Or maybe if you're brave, you leave it open, so the next poor soul can see for himself what pirates really leave behind. The most dangerous treasure wasn't locked in a chest. It was buried in memory. Every pirate carried it. Not gold, not gems, something heavier, something harder to discard. A moment, a face, a promise made before the salt turned their tongues sour and their soul harder than a cannonball. You could see it sometimes in their eyes. When the night grew quiet, when the drink stopped numbing, when a song played that reminded them, vaguely, of something they couldn't quite name, something they hadn't thought about in years. A child's voice, a window with a yellow curtain, a woman laughing into her hand, the way she always did when nervous. These weren't treasures anyone else could see. You couldn't trade them, couldn't bury them, but they followed you, clung to you like salt on skin. And like all treasures, they brought danger, because they made you hesitate. In a raid, in a fight, at the edge of a mutiny, that memory would flick around for a heartbeat. You'd soften. And sometimes, that heartbeat was all it took. A blade between the ribs, a rope around the neck, a look from a crewmate that said, "You've gone soft." But still, pirates clung to them, even if it hurt, even if it was the only human thing they had left, because it reminded them they weren't always this, that once, long ago, before the black flags and the blood, they were someone else, someone smaller, someone who believed in things, in kindness, in safety, in home. You'd find them sometimes, talking to themselves, whispering names no one recognized, clutching tokens rings, ribbons, buttons like rosaries, not for religion, for memory, for anchoring. And when they died, those items stayed behind, found in pockets, tied to wrists, pressed against hearts already gone still. No gold, no maps, just a single, useless thing that meant everything once. And the man who found it would pause, would turn it over in his hand, and maybe, just maybe, he'd wonder, was this the real treasure? Is this what I'm supposed to be looking for? And then he'd put it down. Because real pirates don't cry, not in front of the crew, not where the sea can see. There's a story simple and cruel told in every port where pirates once slept. It goes like this. A man finds a single coin, not just any coin of gold, doubloon, smooth, heavy, perfect. He hides it, of course, won't show the crew, won't spend it, just runs his fingers over it in the dark, again and again, until the ridges feel like a heartbeat. He begins to dream, not of more coins, not of treasure, of escape, of a house inland, a garden, a quiet place with no sails, no flags, no knives. The coin becomes the seed of that dream, the proof that it's possible. And that's the curse, because now he's not just a pirate, he's a man with a plan, and men with plans don't last long at sea. He grows cautious, hesitates in battle, keeps to himself, starts to whisper about leaving after the next raid, or the next, or the next. The crew notices. They always notice. They laugh at first, tease him. What'll you do with a single coin, buy half a cow? Gonna bribe your way into heaven? But the laughter turns, as it always does, into suspicion. And suspicion is blood's older brother. One morning, the man doesn't show up for watch. His hammock is empty. His coin is gone. Some say he slipped away in the night, took a skiff and paddled to freedom. Others say the captain found the coin, took it, and made an example. But most don't say anything, they just nod, because they know the truth. It's not the coin that was cursed, it was the hope. Hope makes you forget the rules, makes you soft, makes you think you can outlive this life, this ship, this salt-stained sentence. But the sea doesn't care about your dreams. It only cares about what you carry. And the moment you carry more than your share, whether it's gold or hope or a single foolish plan, the sea makes room for your replacement. Not all treasure is lost. Some of it was never there to begin with. There's a tale half sung, half sworn about an island. No one agrees on the name. Some call it Isla Perdida. Others say it was once part of the Bahamas, or farther south, past the Spanish Main, a place where the sand was soft as sugar, and the palms grew crooked from too much sun. But what made it special was what lay beneath. A cave, a vault, a hoard beyond imagining. The story always starts the same way. A captain with a map, a mutinous crew, a long chase, a final landing, and then at last the chest. They dig, they sweat, and there it is. Gold so bright it hurts to look at. Crowns, goblets, crosses, coins from empires long gone. Jewels big enough to choke a man. Statues of gods no one remembers. And then, as they argue over who gets what, how to haul it, how to hide it, who should stand guard while the others sleep, the island begins to shift. The ground trembles. The sea climbs higher than it should. Some say it was cursed, that the treasure belonged to the dead and they wanted it back. Others say the island was never real, that it was a mirage, a trick, a dream made flesh just long enough to destroy the greedy. Either way, the end is always the same. The island sinks. Slowly, at first, then faster. The treasure, the cave, the fighting men all gone beneath the waves. Some swim, some drown. A few live long enough to tell the story, and those who hear it, they go looking, again and again. Because hope is louder than history. They search for the island on maps with torn corners. They trace the coastlines, count the stars, argue over old sailor songs. They risk everything, because if they could just find it just once, it would all be worth it. The blood, the lies, the sleepless nights. But they never do. The island never returns. Or maybe it was never there. And that's the cruelest treasure of all. The kind you chase your whole life. The kind that only exists the moment before you reach it. After that, nothing but water, and a silence that never lets go. Piracy, they say, was about freedom. No kings, no rules, no taxes, no hierarchies beyond what the crew agreed to. A floating republic of the damned, an ocean-born democracy. But freedom real, freedom costs something. It costs comfort, it costs safety, and most of all, it costs clarity. Because when no one tells you what's right, you start to forget what is. There's no court on a pirate ship, no judge, just votes. And votes are slippery things, especially when fear is involved. Especially when hunger sets in. Especially when the man you're voting against might be the only one who knows how to navigate. What you get, instead of justice, is improvisation. A punishment dreamed up on the spot. A rope, a lash, a shove into the sea. Maybe a warning first, maybe not. The Articles of Agreement, those much-fabled pirate codes, were meant to offer structure. A list of rules everyone signed before the voyage. Clear, equal, simple. But paper doesn't float long out here. And when it burned, when it tore, when someone rewrote it in the night with ink made of spit and blood, who could argue? The quartermaster might object. The captain might ignore him. The crew might choose to forget the vote ever happened. And just like that, the lawless world they'd fled from had come back. Not as monarchy, not as empire, but as entropy, as disorder wearing a grin. Freedom feels light at first, like wind, like laughter. But if you wear it long enough, it grows teeth. It whispers, nothing matters. It hisses. No one is watching. And when you believe it fully, when you give in and let go of shame, of fear, of accountability, what's left? Not a man. Not a brother, just a blade looking for somewhere to sink. That was the hidden cost, not the hangman, not the hunger, but the slow erosion of the soul. Until one morning, you wake up and realize you've been free for so long. You've forgotten how to be human. Even monsters sing. Even thieves, sleep-deprived, half-starved, sunburned down to the bone, carry music with them. In their throats, in their bones. In the rhythm of their boots across the deck. Sea shanties, work songs, mostly. Born not of joy, but necessity. A way to keep time while hauling rope, to drown out the groan of wood, the crash of waves, the creak of your own mind unraveling. But sometimes, they were more, they were memory, disguised as rhythm. A verse about a girl in Bristol, a chorus about rum in Tortuga, a nonsense refrain that sounded like laughter, but wasn't just a way to stop from crying. They'd sing them during storms, when the sky turned black and the world tilted sideways. They'd sing them during executions, when the rope snapped and someone's feet danced their last. They'd sing them while loading cannonballs, while scrubbing blood off the deck, while waiting for the sun to rise just one more time. Some verses were invented on the spot. Others passed from ship to ship, port to port, until no one remembered who first sang them. A kind of oral map, traced in melody. But not every song was loud. Sometimes, in the small hours after the fighting, after the drinking, one man would hum to himself, something low, broken, something he'd learned as a child, when he still had a name worth remembering, and others would join in. Softly, no eye contact, no smiles, just a slow, shared ache wrapped in tune, because music, even badly sung, is a kind of home, and pirates didn't have homes, not really, just boats, just barrels, just rope and salt and wood. But when they sang, they remembered. Not the murders, not the mutinies, the human parts, the mother's lullaby, the first kiss, the field behind the chapel where the air didn't smell like fish and fire. And when the song ended, no one clapped. They just sat in silence, not out of reverence, but because silence was the only thing left that felt honest. Then someone would cough, someone would laugh, and the mask would go back on. But for a minute, just a minute, they were boys again, not pirates, just people, trying to find the shore. Pirates rarely kept their names. They gave themselves new ones, sharper ones, names that could echo across the deck or strike fear in a port official's heart. Blackbeard, Calico Jack, Red Legs, the Gentleman Pirate. Names worn like armor chosen, not inherited. Because the names they were born with, those belonged to someone else. someone softer, someone who hadn't yet killed, someone who still wrote their mother's name with a steady hand. So they left them behind, not always on purpose. Sometimes it was the crew that renamed you. Sometimes it was the sea. Sometimes it was necessity. A man with a price on his head can't walk into town using the same name he used at baptism. And over time, they forgot. Not just the names, the handwriting, the voice they used when speaking to someone they loved, the way their face looked before the sun carved it into leather. All of it faded. Because when you say a lie long enough, you become it. That's the real cost of reinvention. You get to escape, but you lose the map back. Some pirates carried tokens, a lock of hair, a wooden ring, a letter, barely legible now, folded and unfolded until the paper broke like bone. Others carried nothing, because even memory begins to rot if left too long in the dark. And when they died, because they all died, eventually it was often as someone else. A name carved into the ship's ledger, into the captain's notes, into a ballad, if they were lucky. Not their name, just a name, one that floated on after them like driftwood. And no one knew the truth, that once, long ago, they were someone else, that once they were held, that once they mattered. The ocean didn't remember, the ship didn't care. And their grave, most likely water. No name, no marker. Just the whisper of a name that doesn't echo anymore. There's something about the horizon that makes you believe in it. It never shrinks, never gets closer, always just out of reach. A line drawn by God, or the devil, or some cruel cartographer who thought hope was funny. To a landlocked man, the horizon means possibility. To a pirate, it's something else. It's punishment. You spend your whole life chasing it. Every voyage, every raid, every wind-filled sail aimed straight at that vanishing point. As if beyond it lies the life you were meant for. As if one more port, one more ship, one more treasure will finally be enough. But the horizon isn't a place. It's a loop. It's a trick the sea plays to keep you moving, to keep you hungry, to keep you from ever sitting still long enough to realize how broken you've become. There were pirates who swore they'd settle down. One more haul, they'd say, one last job. Then I'll buy land, plant oranges, marry the woman I left in Charleston, learn to sleep in a bed again. But they never did, because there was always another ship. Always another rumor, always another horizon. And slowly the dream rotted. Their bodies wore out, their teeth fell out, their knuckles cracked in the cold. But still they sailed, not because they believed anymore, but because stopping meant confronting the truth. There's nothing out there, not for them, not anymore. And the sea, brutal and brilliant, knows this. It feeds on it, gives just enough wind to keep them going, just enough blue sky to make them think maybe this time it'll be different. And when they die, because the sea always collects its debts, it does so without drama. They vanish, a slip overboard, a fever, a duel lost by half a breath. And the horizon, it stays, perfect, untouched, unbothered, waiting for the next man to chase it. Because that's what the sea does. It doesn't give you what you want. It gives you just enough to believe it might. When a pirate dies, it doesn't look like the songs say. There's no solemn bell tolling across a quiet harbor. No black sails lowered to half-mast. No weeping widow holding a child that bears his eyes. Just a splash. That's it. Maybe someone mutters a prayer. Maybe someone doesn't. It depends on how he died and how useful he was. If the body's intact, they sew it into a hammock. Stitch it closed with the last sail needle that isn't rusted through. They put a weight at the fetter cannonball, a stone, whatever's at hand. Sometimes they use coins, which is ironic, really. A life spent chasing gold ends with one pressed against each eye so your corpse doesn't float. He slid overboard at dawn, or at dusk. They pick whichever moment feels lonelier. A few men gather, not because they cared, because it's tradition. The quartermaster might say something, a verse half remembered from a religion no one practices anymore. Something about the sea, giving and taking. Something about rest. It won't be poetic, but it'll be true. And then it's done. He's gone. The ship rocks gently. The wind whistles in the rigging. A gull might cry. Someone laughs below deck, unaware, uninterested, that a crewmate is now food for whatever lives in the deep. And life goes on, because it has to. No one mourns long on a pirate ship. Mourning slows the work, makes men soft, reminds them that they too are bones waiting to be swallowed. But in the dark, alone in their hammocks, some of them do think, not about the dead man, but about their own ending. Will anyone notice? Will anyone care? Will their name be remembered? Or just another smudge in a logbook? Another story that gets retold with the wrong details until the truth rots like everything else at sea. A pirate's wake is short, unwritten, unmarked. And that's the way it's always been. The sea takes you, and the sea forgets you, faster than your breath fades from the wind. Every pirate, at some point, thinks about leaving. Not just the ship, the life, the endless raids, the salt-cracked skin, the stink of men who no longer dream. They think about land, about stillness, about being someone else. He was one of those. No one remembered his real name. They called him Flint, or Salt, or something equally worn and meaningless. He'd been on 3 ships, under 4 captains, killed in 2 mutinies, lost a finger in one storm and a tooth in another. But Flint lets call him that he had a secret, a pouch, soft leather, tucked deep in his bunk, never shown, never mentioned. Inside it, a scrap of paper, a crude map, a drawing of a house, just a few lines, square, chimney, fence, childlike, impossible, and a ring, plain brass, not valuable, except to him. He looked at it some nights, when the sea was quiet and no one else stirred, just for a minute, just long enough to remember what hope used to feel like. The crew didn't ask. Pirates don't ask. Curiosity gets you killed quicker than cowardice. But they noticed the way he flinched at unnecessary violence, the way he never drank to blackout, the way he watched the horizon not with hunger, but with longing. He'd saved more than anyone knew. Siphoned shares into a separate bag, buried beneath his boots. Refused to spend it on brothels or cards or drink. Refused to believe the lie that gold was only good if it vanished by morning. Flint had a plan. One more voyage, one more score. Then he'd leave. Buy a patch of land in Carolina, or maybe the Spanish territories. Build that house. Hammer by hand. Cook his own meals. Die under stars that didn't sway above him like judgment. But plans don't last long at sea. It wasn't mutiny. It wasn't fire. It wasn't even betrayal. It was luck, bad luck. A raid gone sideways. Gunpowder that didn't catch. A saber that caught him just beneath the ribs, in that soft place he'd always been careful to guard. They dragged him back to the ship, bleeding, breathing hard, fingers already slick with death. He held the ring. He tried to speak. No one listened. Too busy steering, firing, counting the bodies. By the time they looked down, he was gone. The pouch was still under his bunk. the map still folded, the dream still intact, just without its dreamer. They didn't bury him, just rolled him over the edge, like all the others. And the sea, which never cared for dreams, made no comment. And that's the hardest part, maybe. Not that he died, but that no one else saw what he was trying to become. For those rare few who did leave the sea, who stepped off the deck one last time and didn't return, the world on land was not what they'd imagined. It was colder, not in temperature, but in tone, in the way people looked at them, as if their skin carried a scent no soap could scrub away, as if their stories didn't quite belong. You couldn't just become someone else. You could change your name, yes, grow a beard, wear sleeves long enough to cover the scars, the tattoos. You could buy land, plant crops, nod politely in church, but it never lasted, because land is slower, and pirates were built for fast. The days dragged, the quiet pressed against the skull like too tight boots. There were no waves, no sails, no wind to chase or run from, just stillness. And in that stillness, something crept in. Guilt, maybe, or memory. They'd wake at dawn, as if called to watch, fling open shutters, expecting cannon fire, hear laughter and tense, waiting for the knife in it. Sleep with knives under their pillow, even when no one else shared the room. They tried, God knows, they tried. Tried farming, tried fishing, tried loving women who had no idea what they'd done, and men who looked at them like projects to be solved. But you can't water a garden with hands used to blood. And the earth, unlike the sea, doesn't forget. They'd dig and dig and dig, and still the land would give nothing, as if it knew, as if it didn't want them. So they faded, not dramatically, no flames, no fights, just a slow quieting. Some sold their land and went back to the coast, to watch the ships come and go, not to board, just to see them, like watching a life you can no longer live. Some drank until their memory blurred and their accent returned. A few walked into the woods and didn't come back, and the world, it let them, because pirates didn't belong in taverns with good lighting, didn't fit at tables where prayers were said before meals. They were ghosts, not just to history, but to themselves. And for every one who tried to start over, 100 never bothered. Because starting over implies there's still something left to start with. Not every pirate left nothing behind. Some left children, not in the romantic sense. No tender goodbyes, no promises scrawled in charcoal on the back of a love letter. Just accidents of proximity, a night in a port, a face half remembered, a brief flicker of softness in a life otherwise made of stone. And so, here and there, scattered like driftwood across the world, children, born of salt and silence. Some never knew the truth. Their mothers told stories. Sometimes he was a sailor, he was a merchant, he died at sea. Simple lies, soft ones, just enough to blur the edges of shame and longing. Others were told the truth. He was a pirate. The word came with weight, with fire in the eyes. Sometimes fear, sometimes pride, more often both. And what does a child do with that? Some wore it like a badge, grew up half wild, daring, reckless, stared out at the sea and felt something stir, something old and aching. A call they couldn't quite name. Others ran from it, changed their names, cut ties, spoke in clipped sentences when asked about their father, and a few followed. They found ships, sailed under aliases, carved their own scars into the wood, not because they loved the life, but because they needed to understand. To understand him, the man who left, the man who vanished. the man whose blood ran in their veins like brine. Sometimes they found stories. A crewman who remembered his face, a tavern girl who wept when his name was mentioned, a logbook, stained and torn with a single entry, fought like hell, didn't scream when he bled, and that was it, their inheritance. Not land, not gold, just fragments, whispers, a shadow cast on water. But in some strange way, it was enough, because pirates, for all their sins, were honest in one thing: they belonged to no one, not the crown, not the law, not even the sea. And so their children, scattered and strange, grew up with the same ache, the same hunger, the same question etched deep into their bones. What would make a man choose this? And sometimes they answered it by doing the same. Not everyone who lived among pirates sailed. Some stayed ashore. The women who poured drinks for blood-stained men, the blacksmith who fixed the broken blades, the midwife who delivered their bastard children in the dark, swearing not to ask names, the tailor who patched coats that smelled like gunpowder and guilt. They didn't raid, they didn't kill, but they lived in the shadow of men who did, and they learned, quickly, how to navigate that shadow. Some became rich, opened shops, took payment in silver, rum, favors, knew better than to ask where a coin came from, knew the difference between a pirate flush with plunder and one who'd bet his last gold piece on a dying dream. Others lived more quietly, took in boarders, sold bread, watched the horizon with tired eyes. They had their own code. Don't look too long. Don't speak too loud. Don't trust a man who won't meet your gaze. Because harboring a pirate wasn't romantic. It was dangerous. Empires didn't forget. Governors changed. And the law, when it came, didn't care if you ever touched a ship. If you had fed them, clothed them, hid them, was enough. Some were hanged, others simply disappeared, taken in the night, burned out of their homes, stories erased, just gaps in the census where names used to be. And yet, they stayed, because they understood something the world didn't. Pirates were men, broken, flawed, frightened, but men, and they needed places to land, places to rest, to remember, however briefly, that the world wasn't all salt and steel. The people who stayed ashore became anchors, not to stop the ships, but to prove, even briefly, that the sea hadn't claimed everything, that humanity could survive the tide, even if just for a night. On the rare occasion a pirate did make it back, truly back, not just ashore, but into the soft, fragile world of ordinary life. They brought things with them, not chests, not coin, not jewels strung on velvet cords, but stranger things, quiet things. A habit of waking at dawn, blade in hand, a scar under the left collarbone, still tender, even decades later. An inability to sleep indoors for more than a week without pacing. They brought fear with them, not their own but others. Neighbors who never quite looked them in the eye. Churchgoers who whispered, children warned not to ask. They brought silence, so much silence, because how do you explain what it's like to hear a man scream in 3 languages before dying? How do you describe the way your hands shake, not during the killing, but afterward, when no one's watching? They brought laughter, to a strange, sharp laughter that didn't always fit the room. They'd laugh at thunder, at spilled wine, at the sound of a door slamming in the wind. They brought songs, hummed under their breath, forgotten tunes that never made it into books. And they brought the sea, in their posture, in their breath, in the way they looked at maps, not to find a route, but to measure how far they could run, if they had to. Sometimes they stayed, married, settled, became blacksmiths, ferrymen, guards, lived simply, paid in silver, not blood, but the past followed them, in the dreams, in the aches that never healed, in the way their hearts beat faster at the smell of brine on a cold morning. Some left again, not back to piracy, just ... away, to the woods, to the coast, to silence, not because they were running, but because they had never truly returned. Because when you give yourself to the sea even for a little while, some part of you stays with her, anchored in the dark, unreachable, unforgiven, unforgotten. There's always a ship in these stories, not one you can name, not one that made the record books or survived in paintings, just a whisper of wood and wind, seen once in fog and never again. No flag, no crew, just sails to white and a silence too deep. Some say it's cursed, others say it's memory, collective guilt rising from the sea like steam from a grave. A ship crewed by those who never made it home, who vanished in mutiny or storm or madness, and who now sail forever because the sea won't let them stop. No port welcomes them, no harbor claims them, just endless horizon. And if you listen, sailors say, you can hear it at night. A creek with no wind, a lantern where there should be none, the sound of a rope swinging just once. They call it the Grey Widow, or the Salt Bride, or just her. No need for more. Everyone who's been at sea long enough knows what her means. She doesn't attack, doesn't speak, she just watches, passing behind storms, rising behind mists, close enough for you to see the outline of bodies on deck still, silent, standing at attention like they're waiting for a command that never comes. And the truly unlucky, they say they've seen their own faces on that deck, as if the ship shows you your own death before it happens, not as punishment, as promise, because the sea remembers every stolen life, every unburied body, every laugh that covered a scream. She remembers and she keeps them, not out of malice, out of order. The sea is nothing if not patient, and those who defy her, she doesn't drown them, she keeps them. And when your ship is quiet, when the wind dies, and the compass spins, and someone says they see a light in the distance, don't look too long. Don't call out, and whatever you do, don't answer if they call back. Some captains didn't sink with their ships, not in body, in legend. You'll hear their names whispered in taverns, scratched into wood tables with knives, muttered by men too drunk to remember their own. Not because they were good, but because they wouldn't let the story end. One in particular, no one agrees on the name. Some say Captain Vane, others say something older, something stranger. No matter. The shape of the myth is what matters. They say he was hanged once, twice, that the rope snapped, that he laughed, that he walked from the gallows with the kind of grin only a man who's met death and declined can wear. They say he cursed the sea and was answered. They say he kept a bottle of water from the river Styx in his coat, and a knife carved from a whale's jawbone under his belt, that he never blinked, never slept, that his ship ran on no wind but rage, and that he's still out there, still raiding, still watching, the kind of captain who appears when a crew is at its weakest, starving, fighting, breaking, offers a deal, a job, a treasure so large it shines in your mind before he's done speaking. And always, always, the same promise. You'll live forever, and maybe you do, until you don't. Because the crews that sail with him never come back. Not whole, not sane, sometimes not at all. A survivor will wash up months later, wild-eyed burned, whispering about eyes in the dark and songs with no source and a captain who bled ink when wounded. One claimed the captain's shadow moved on its own. Another said he never left the wheel knot even to sleep. Just stood there, one hand on the helm, the other clenching a locket no one dared to ask about. And when the sea finally takes the ship, finally drags it down in some final roar of justice, he walks out, always, onto a new ship, a new crew, a new story. Because some men die only once. Others die every time they're remembered. And some never at all. They say there's a book, not in any library, not under lock and key, just ... out there. A heavy, sea-dark thing, bound in hide, damp at the corners, smelling of brine and rot. Found once every few years in a dry barrel, or behind a hidden panel, or floating on a wave like it knows where it's going. They call it the pirate's ledger, but it's not a record of plunder. It doesn't list treasures or ports or the names of ships taken. It lists people, every man who ever sailed under a black flag, every name, and not just names, details. The lie that got them aboard, the first blood they spilled, the last thing they said before the sea swallowed them. And the strangest part, the part no one can explain. The entries keep appearing, even now. Even for pirates, long thought dead, lost in legend, or erased by time. Someone opens the book, and there it is, fresh ink, still drying, curling into words like a whisper. Sometimes it writes in languages no one speaks anymore. Sometimes it draws instead maps of islands that don't exist. Sigils carved into ship planks, faces so detailed it hurts to look at them. And on rare, terrible nights, it writes ahead. Names of men still alive, with dates. Dates that haven't happened yet. One man tried to burn it. They say the fire went out. Another threw it overboard. It returned, days later, in his hammock, seaweed clinging to its spine. A third read his own name, with the words, bitten, not drowned. He laughed. A week later, a rat on board turned rabid, tore out his throat. Now no one opens it willingly, but still it moves, from hand to hand, ship to ship, like it's watching, tallying. Because, for all the freedom pirates claimed, there was always a price, and someone, somewhere, is keeping track. There's an island no one sails to on purpose. It doesn't show on maps. The stars refuse to mark it. Compasses spin when it's near. And yet, somehow, every pirate ship at least once passes within sight. They never mean to, but it happens. Some say it's because the island calls to them. Others say it's just geography, a place that sits exactly where desperation peaks. They call it Deadwater Key. It's small, rocky, ringed with bone-colored sand and black trees that don't move, even in wind. But what draws the eye isn't the beach. It's the tavern, right in the center of the island. Flickering lights, music, soft and strange, laughter warm, familiar, impossible, and voices you recognize, men you buried, women who vanished, a first mate you lost in a mutiny 10 years ago, a lover who bled out in Nassau, a friend who jumped ship and never surfaced. They're all there, drinking, singing, waiting. Some captains steer away. They feel the wrongness in the air, the silence behind the sound, the weight in their gut. They turn their ship. They do not look back, but some anchor, some go ashore. And if you do, the island welcomes you. The drink is good, better than it should be. The faces are kind. No one asks why you're there. They just pull out a chair, clap you on the back, pour you a cup, and for a while you forget. Forget your debts, your scars, the weight of your name. You laugh again, You rest. You remember what it was like to feel human, but stay too long, and you become one of them. You don't age, you don't rot, but you don't leave. You sit at the table. You pour the next cup. You watch the newcomers stagger in, wide-eyed and hopeful, and you don't warn them, because it's not a curse. Not exactly, it's just ... Easier to stop chasing the sea, to let the ghosts have you, to drink until the pain fades, and the tide forgets your name. There's a bell, they say, hanging from a crooked post on a cliff above a bay no one can find twice. No rope attached, no wind strong enough to move it, rusted through in places, cracked, silent. But it's not broken. It just doesn't ring for the living. Sailors say, if you hear it just once you've been marked. Doesn't matter where you are. Could be at sea, in the middle of a storm, heart pounding as the sails tear loose. Could be in a tavern, alone, your cup empty, listening to the ocean breathe just beyond the window. Could be years after your last voyage, your hands now soft, your hair gone grey. The bell doesn't care. It rings only for you, once, clear, low, like thunder remembered. And when it does, you'll feel it, in your chest, like a hand closing, slowly, around your ribs. The bell is not a threat, it's an invitation. It means your time is up, not because you failed, or were caught, or forgot the code, simply because you've lasted too long. It's time to come back, back to the tide, back to the ship you thought you left behind, back to the place all pirates go, eventually whether they're buried in soil or swallowed by the sea. Some resist, they run, hide, pray, but the sound follows them, in their ears, in their dreams, in the echoing clink of coins they can't seem to spend. Some accept it. They walk into the surf, fully clothed, or board a ship they don't remember hiring, or wake up one morning with their boots on, knife and belt, headed toward a harbor that doesn't exist on any map they've seen. And when they're gone, no one looks for them, because every sailor knows the bell only rings once, and no one who hears it ever comes back. Not all pirates chased treasure. Some just wanted to disappear. You could see it in their eyes. The ones who didn't laugh, didn't boast, didn't carve notches in their belt. They kept to themselves, did their work, never raised their voice unless the ship was on fire. They didn't sign up for gold. They signed up to be forgotten. They were running from a noose, maybe, or a name, or a face they couldn't bear to see every time they closed their eyes. The kind of man who looked like he might have once worn a uniform, or read poetry, or kissed someone he shouldn't have. They didn't want a legacy. They wanted silence. And the sea, cruel as she is, grants that, if you let her. These men ghosts in the making slept furthest from the light, wrapped themselves in blankets even when the air was hot, didn't keep journals, didn't draw maps, didn't leave marks on the wood. You might forget they were there at all, until something went wrong. A rig snaps, a mutiny brews, a man goes overboard, and suddenly they're moving, quick, precise, like someone who's done this before, not just seen it but caused it. That's when the crew starts wondering, who is he? What did he do? Why won't he say his real name? But by then, it's too late, because he's already fading again, back into the shadows, back into the rhythm of salt and sweat and silence. Some say these are the ones who last longest, because they don't want anything from the sea. They don't believe in treasure or freedom or fate. They're not here to become legends. They're here to not be found. And sometimes when the storm is high and the moon is gone and the ship, creaks like a voice too old to speak. One of them will be seen on deck, alone, looking not out, but down into the dark, as if waiting for it to look back. Every ship had a lantern, hung at the stern, a simple thing glass-paneled, rust-framed, swinging from a crooked hook like it was too tired to fall. Its flame was small, fragile, always one gust from going dark. But it didn't, not really. Through storms, it burned. Through cannon fire and mutiny and hunger, it flickered, but it stayed. Not because it was protected, because it was watched. Someone always kept an eye on it, always made sure the oil didn't run dry, always checked the glass, the wick, the flame itself. Not for light, but for something else. The lantern meant presence. A reminder that, in all this madness, all this drifting, there was still something holding fast. A tiny center of warmth in a world gone cold. It was superstition, yes, but pirates lived on superstition. They'd rather lose a sail than lose that flame. More than one man refused to board a ship whose lantern had gone out. Said it was a sign, a message, a soul snuffed early. Sometimes a man would die and the lantern would go dark the same hour. No wind, no reason, just gone. They'd say his spirit took the light with him, or that the sea, jealous of warmth, reached up and claimed it. And when the ship finally sank, as all ships do, that lantern was the last thing to vanish beneath the waves, glowing still like an eye slowly closing. Some say if you sail far enough and the fog is thin, you'll see it. Not attached to any ship, just drifting. A little flame in the dark, and if you follow it, it leads you somewhere strange. Not to treasure, not to safety, but to memory, old wrecks, old songs, old voices calling from decks long rotted through. The lantern burns, still, not for heat, not for hope, just to say, we were here, we mattered, even if no one remembers our names. The sea doesn't shout, she waits, while men scream and shoot and weep into their rum, she listens. While ships clash and splinter, she swells. While stories are told, twisted, forgotten, she remembers. And in the end, when all of it is quiet again, she speaks. Not with words, with absence. You'll hear it if you're still enough. If the wind dies and the crew holds its breath and the sails stop flapping like frightened birds, you'll hear it in the lapping waves, in the knock of driftwood against the hull, in the long, low moan that might be rope, might be ghost. It's not warning, it's not kindness, it's conclusion. The sea's final word is removal. She doesn't take you with vengeance. She takes you because you're hers. She takes your ship, your bones, your breath, and in return, she gives you forgetting. No grave, no stone, just silt. And you don't fight it. Not really. Because every man who's ever sailed her knows deep down, beneath the tattoos and the snarling and the songs, that this was always how it ends. Not in glory, not in gold, just gone, and yet there's peace in that. Not the kind you earn, the kind you fall into, the way a stone falls into still water, slow at first, then fast, then silence. Some say the sea keeps their names, others say she gives them new ones, a tide name, a wind name, something whispered only by whales and remembered only in shipwrecks. And if you're lucky, truly lucky, you'll hear it once before you go, your real name, not the one you carved on your blade or scrawled on your skin, the one you were meant to have all along, the one the sea has been saving for you. There is always a map, tattered, stained, edges burned or chewed by rats, lines drawn too carefully to trust, X marks drawn in ink that fades when touched by sea air. curves that don't match any known coastline, symbols no one ever properly explains. Pirates lived and died by maps, but the truth, most of them were lies. Distractions, traps, hope wrapped in parchment. They were drawn to mislead enemies, rivals, even crewmates. They were copied from fevered memories or carved into walls by dying men whose last thoughts were gold. But every pirate kept one, even if they said they didn't, even if they laughed at the idea. Folded in a boot, tucked into a shirt lining, sewn into the hem of a coat. Just one last map, one last maybe. And they followed them, not because they believed, but because they needed to believe. That somewhere, just beyond the edge, beyond the storm, beyond the reach of flags and ropes and regret, there was something that would make it all make sense. That the killing, the hiding, the hunger was leading somewhere. That if they could just find the spot, dig the right hole, break the right lock, they'd find something that felt like forgiveness. But the maps never delivered. Some led to ruins, others to traps. One led to a pit full of snakes, another to a field so quiet it made men scream. One led straight to a cliff, and the man holding it didn't stop walking. Still, they followed, because it wasn't really about the treasure. It was about needing there to be one, needing the story to have a shape, an end, needing the last page to say something other than it was all for nothing. But maps lie, and even the honest ones fade. And by the time a pirate reaches the end of his story, he's not looking for gold. He's looking for a place to rest. And maybe, if the sea is kind, he finds it. And maybe, if you're lucky, you don't. Because the ones who never find the X, they get to keep looking. And in that, there's something like freedom, something like hope. There comes a moment, always, when the story stops. Not with a bang, not with glory, just a breath held too long. A line that doesn't finish, a voice that doesn't come back. The last lantern gutters, the last deck creaks. The last name is spoken and no one repeats it. That's how it ends. Not with death, not exactly, but with forgetting. Because even pirates, for all their fury and fire and flagrant noise, are still human. And humans vanish when no one remembers them. The gold fades first, melts, changes hands, becomes inheritance, tax, dust. Then the ship, which doesn't last in salt. It breaks, rots, sinks, turns into reef or nothing. Then the stories, told less and less, whittled down to caricature. He was brave, he was cruel, he had a beard or he didn't. He sailed here or there, he buried something or maybe he lied. And finally, the face, the eyes, the small things no one writes down. The way he laughed like he was trying not to. The way he touched his ring before every battle. The song he hummed when tying knots. The look he gave the sea when he thought no one was watching. All of it gone. And then, for a while, there's quiet. And in that quiet, a ship that no longer exists keeps sailing. A crew that no longer breathes keeps singing. A flag that no longer matters keeps flying. Not because they're still out there, but because someone somewhere still listens. And in that listening, they flicker, like fire in fog, like the last light on the last night before the tide takes everything, like memory, frail, brief, but enough. Enough to matter, enough to make the dark feel less alone. And when that light finally goes out, when even the whispers fade, and no one watches the sea with wonder or fear, that's the end. Not just of a story, but of the world it made, and the world it left behind. Thank you for staying with me through the salt and silence, through storms and songs and that long, slow fading light. If this story kept you company, if it helped you fall asleep, or helped you feel a little less alone in the quiet hours, I'm really glad you found your way here. You're always welcome back. If you'd like more stories like this, softly told and stitched with sleep and sorrow, you can subscribe to the channel. No pressure, just when you're ready, when the night feels long again. And if you feel like sharing, I'd love to know where you're listening from, or what time it is there, or even just how you're feeling. But for now, close your eyes, breathe deep, and drift easy. Good night.